Hell's Angel walked in, carrying injured girl. The entire hospital went silent after discovering this. The double doors flew open as Vince stormed into the hospital, a whirlwind of leather and desperation. Heads turned, conversations halted, the ambient noise of the ER evaporating with each echo of his heavy boots. The little girl in his arms, Annie, appeared alarmingly fragile. Her clothes were smeared with blood, and her tiny face was a canvas of blueberries and violets. "Help her!" His voice cracked through the tension like thunder, commanding attention. Nurse Clara, initially taken aback, met his eyes. Hers softened in response to the plea swimming beneath his gruff exterior. She nudged a colleague, breaking whatever spell had momentarily frozen them. "Gurney, now!" Clara shouted above the silence. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. A tide of white coats and hurried footsteps swept past Vince, engulfing Annie in a choreography of urgency. His staggering presence became a mere crescent to this circle of care. He handed Annie over, gently, reluctantly, feeling the wrench as she slipped from his embrace into unfamiliar hands. The stark hallway reverberated with clinical chaos as Annie was wheeled away, leaving Vince rooted, vulnerable in her absence. He stood motionless, energy spent. Memories surged, remonstrations from a past he could never fully outrun. Not now, he thought. Not here. Vince's leather-clad shoulders slumped, the weight of a past life pressing heavily upon him. But above it all resided hope. An unfamiliar, fragile guest he couldn't dare to entertain too thoroughly. Nearby, a doctor hurried, clipboard clutched tightly. Catching her eye, he asked, "She's going to be okay?" With practiced calm, she nodded. "We'll do everything we can, sir." No reassurance, just a steady promise wrapped in professionalism. It would have to be enough. "Her name's Annie," he added, suddenly eager to tether his daughter to this place with something as simple as a name. "Annie," the doctor repeated, disappearing behind another set of doors, leaving Vince adrift in an uncertain sea. He turned slowly, the rush around him now blurred wisdom. Time slowed, measured in every heartbeat echoing her absence. Vince staggered to a chair, collapsing heavily into it. A tremor overtook his hands, though he clenched them into fists. Finally, alone with the distant rhythm of heart monitors and shuffling feet, Vince allowed his mask to slip. Here, without preamble or judgment, simply a father petrified at the prospect of losing the one soul for whom he had fought to become whole. And so he waited, breathing through the tempest. The distant beeping a reminder that life, her life, still beat on. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Vince's weathered face as he sat rigidly on the plastic bench. His large hands, adorned with faded tattoos, trembled as he wiped them repeatedly on his worn jeans. The waiting room's silence felt suffocating, broken only by the occasional squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum and the distant echo of hospital machinery. Every few seconds, his eyes darted to the double doors where they'd taken Annie. The tough exterior that had served him well in his previous life now seemed to crack and splinter, revealing the raw fear underneath. His leather vest, bearing the unmistakable Hell's Angels patch, felt heavy on his shoulders, a weight of his past that seemed particularly burdensome in this sterile environment. A nurse approached, her footsteps measured and careful. Vince recognized her as one of the first to respond when he'd burst through the doors with Annie. Her name tag read Clara, and there was something in her eyes that spoke of understanding rather than judgment. She moved with the confident grace of someone who'd seen it all, but hadn't let it harden her heart. "Is she going to be okay?" Vince's voice came out, hoarse and unsteady, so different from his usual commanding tone. The words seemed to catch in his throat, choking him with their desperation. Clara's steps slowed as she drew nearer, maintaining a respectful distance while close enough to speak softly. Her scrubs were crisp and clean, a stark contrast to Vince's blood-stained clothing. She studied his face, noting how his fierce appearance belied the vulnerability in his eyes. "The doctors are working on her now," Clara said, her voice gentle but professional. "She's in good hands, Mr. Malone." She paused, watching as he absorbed this information. "Would you like some water?" Vince shook his head, his beard brushing against the collar of his leather vest. His hands continued their nervous dance across his jeans, leaving damp trails on the denim. The skull ring on his right hand caught the fluorescent light, a reminder of a life he'd been trying to leave behind. "I should have been more careful," he muttered, more to himself than to Clara. The words seemed to echo in the empty space between them, heavy with unspoken history. Clara took another step closer, her clipboard held loosely at her side. "These things happen, Mr. Malone. Children are resilient." Her tone carried warmth, though her trained eye didn't miss the slight tremor in his hands, or the way his shoulders hunched forward protectively. Vince looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed but dry. The fluorescent lights highlighted the gray streaks in his beard and the lines around his eyes, marks of a life lived hard and fast. "You don't understand," he said quietly. "She's all I got." Clara nodded, compassion softening her features. "We'll take good care of her," she assured him, her words carrying the weight of a promise. She watched him for a moment longer, noting how his massive frame seemed to shrink under the weight of his worry. With a final glance at the trembling hands that betrayed his tough exterior, Clara turned and walked away, her shoes making soft sounds against the floor as she headed back toward the trauma room. Her mind was already working through the questions that Vince's presence had raised, but her immediate concern was for the little girl behind those double doors. The small apartment smelled of coffee and motor oil, a combination that had become home to Vince and his family. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, catching dust motes that danced in the air. 3-year-old Annie sat in his massive arms, her tiny fingers tracing the tattoos that covered his forearms. Her dark curls tickled his chin as she leaned against his chest, listening to him hum an old lullaby. Sarah's picture hung on the wall, her bright smile frozen in time. It was taken the day Annie was born, Sarah's face glowing with joy as she cradled their newborn daughter. The frame was slightly crooked, but Vince couldn't bring himself to adjust it. Something about its imperfection felt right. "Daddy," Annie murmured sleepily, her small hand patting his cheek. "Tell me about Mommy again." Vince shifted in the worn armchair, adjusting Annie so she could see her mother's picture. "Your mommy," he began, his voice soft despite his rough appearance, "had the prettiest smile in the world, just like yours, princess." Annie's eyes, heavy with approaching sleep, fixed on the photograph. "She's watching us, right?" "Always, baby girl." Vince pulled her closer, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo. "I promise you, Annie, I'll never let anything happen to you. You're my whole world." The memory shifted, blurring like watercolors in the rain, transforming into that terrible day 6 months later. The hospital hallway stretched endlessly before him, its fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving. Annie slept in a plastic chair, unaware that her world was about to change forever. A doctor in green scrubs approached, his face grave. "Mr. Malone," the doctor began, but Vince already knew. He could read it in the man's eyes, in the way his shoulders slumped slightly. Sarah was gone. A simple drive to the grocery store had ended in screeching tires and twisted metal. Vince's legs gave out, and he slid down the wall to the floor. His leather vest creaked as he bent forward, hands covering his face. The skull ring on his right hand pressed cold against his cheek. How could he do this alone? How could he raise Annie without Sarah? The scene dissolved again, reforming into a crisp autumn afternoon years later. Vince stood outside their apartment building, still wearing his Hell's Angels colors, but carrying himself differently now. The leather vest felt more like a reminder of the past than a badge of honor. He'd distanced himself from the dangerous aspects of club life, focusing instead on legitimate work at the motorcycle shop. The yellow school bus rounded the corner, its brakes squealing softly as it stopped. 8-year-old Annie bounded down the steps, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Her face lit up when she spotted him, and she broke into a run. Her dark curls, so like Sarah's, streamed behind her as she raced toward him. Her smile was pure sunshine, untouched by the shadows of his past. She wore the jean jacket he'd bought her last birthday, decorated with the butterfly patches she'd chosen herself. "Daddy," she called out, her voice carrying across the short distance between them. Other parents milled around, some casting wary glances at his imposing figure, but Vince barely noticed them. His whole world was contained in that little girl running toward him, her eyes bright with love and trust. The same eyes that had once traced his tattoos now sparkled with stories from her school day, innocent and full of hope. In them, Vince saw everything he'd promised Sarah he would protect, everything he'd vowed to keep safe that night in the cluttered apartment so long ago. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the hospital waiting room as the hours crept by. Clara moved between the nurses' station and the trauma area, her white sneakers squeaking softly on the polished floor. Every time she passed, Vince's eyes followed her, searching for any hint of news about Annie. The waiting room had emptied except for Vince, who couldn't sit still. His heavy boots traced the same path over and over, from the vending machine to the window, then back to the uncomfortable plastic chairs. His leather vest creaked with each movement, and the chains on his jeans clinked softly, marking time like a metronome. Clara stood at the nurse's station, flipping through Annie's preliminary charts. Her brow furrowed as she studied the notes, and she kept glancing at Vince when she thought he wasn't looking. 2 other nurses huddled near her, their voices barely above whispers. "Did you see his vest?" the younger nurse asked, her ponytail bobbing as she leaned in closer. "Hell's Angels. You know what they're like." "Shh," the other nurse hissed, but her eyes darted toward Vince. "My cousin dated one of them once. Nothing but trouble. And that poor little girl." Vince's jaw clenched, his massive hands balled into fists, knuckles white with tension. He'd heard these whispers before, in grocery stores, at Annie's school, everywhere they went. Usually, he could ignore them, but not now. Not with Annie lying in that trauma room. Clara noticed his reaction and shooed the other nurses away. She approached him carefully, clipboard held against her chest like a shield. "Mr. Malone, would you like some water?" "Just tell me how she is," he said, his voice rough with worry. He towered over Clara, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she saw past his intimidating exterior to the father, desperate for news about his daughter. "The doctors are doing everything they can," she assured him. Her voice was gentle, caring. "Annie's strong. We can see that." Vince ran a hand through his beard, then over his head. The tattoo on his neck, a small heart with Annie written inside, peeked out from under his collar. "She's all I've got," he whispered, more to himself than to Clara. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet room. Each second felt like an eternity. Clara made notes in her charts, but her eyes kept returning to Vince. She saw how his shoulders slumped with exhaustion, how his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was watching. More whispers drifted from the nurses' station. Should we call social services? Look at those bruises. Someone should investigate. Vince's pacing became more agitated. His boots scuffed the floor tiles, leaving black marks that would need to be cleaned later. The chains on his jeans jangled more urgently. Clara watched as he clenched and unclenched his fists, fighting to maintain control. The double doors to the trauma area suddenly swung open. The head surgeon emerged, still wearing his surgical cap and mask pulled down around his neck. His face was drawn, serious. Vince froze mid-step, his whole body tensing. "Mr. Malone," the surgeon said, his voice carefully neutral. "We've stabilized her, but there's something we need to talk about. Her injuries aren't just from a crash." The surgeon's words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Vince felt his stomach drop as the doctor pulled out several X-ray films, holding them up to the light. "These dark areas here," the surgeon pointed to several spots on the images, "show breaks that happened weeks ago, and these—" he indicated other areas. "These are much older. Some of these injuries have healed improperly, suggesting they were never treated." Vince's face drained of color. His massive frame seemed to shrink as he stared at the images, his mouth going dry. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the silence even more pronounced. "Mr. Malone," the surgeon continued, his voice stern but professional. "As medical professionals, we're required by law to report suspected abuse. These injuries are consistent with patterns we see in—" "I didn't do this," Vince interrupted, his voice cracking. He shook his head vigorously, taking a step backward. "I swear I didn't. I would never hurt Annie. Never." His hands trembled as he ran them through his beard, the tattoos on his arms stark against his pale skin. The surgeon's expression hardened. "Sir, the evidence suggests otherwise. There are bruises in various stages of healing. The broken ribs show." "You don't understand," Vince pleaded, his tough exterior crumbling completely. "She's my little girl, my whole world. I'd die before I'd hurt her." His eyes were wet with tears he refused to let fall. Two security guards appeared at the end of the hallway, summoned by one of the nurses. They stood ready, watching the scene unfold. The whispers from the nurses' station had stopped entirely, replaced by tense silence. "Mr. Malone," the surgeon said, "until we complete our investigation, we'll need to restrict your access to—" "Wait." Clara's voice cut through the tension. She stepped forward from where she'd been standing, her face determined. "I need to say something." All eyes turned to her as she moved to stand between Vince and the surgeon. Her scrubs rustled softly as she squared her shoulders. "Doctor, I've been watching Mr. Malone since they arrived," she said firmly. "I've seen how he looks at his daughter, how he talks about her. That's not the behavior of an abuser." She glanced back at Vince, who stood frozen, his eyes fixed on her. When Annie was semi-conscious earlier, she reached for his hand. She wasn't afraid of him. She wanted him close. The surgeon frowned. "Nurse Stevens, with all due respect, you can't possibly know." "I've worked in this ER for 15 years, Clara interrupted. "I've seen real abuse cases. I've seen the fear in children's eyes when their abusers are near." She took a deep breath. "That's not what I see here. Something else is going on." Despite Clara's passionate defense, the surgeon's expression remained skeptical. He gestured to the security guards, who took a step closer. "I appreciate your input, Nurse Stevens, but we have protocols to follow. Mr. Malone, I'm going to have to ask you to stay in the waiting room until social services arrives." Vince's face crumpled. He looked through the glass doors leading to the trauma area, where somewhere beyond, Annie lay unconscious. The thought of being separated from her, of not being there when she woke up, made his chest tighten painfully. His worst fear was becoming reality, losing Annie forever. Clara stood beside Vince in the hospital corridor, her presence offering silent support when the clicking of heels against linoleum caught their attention. A woman in a charcoal gray suit strode purposefully toward them, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Mr. Malone?" Her voice was crisp and professional. "I'm Dana Stevens from Child Protective Services." She extended her hand, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. Vince hesitated before shaking her hand, his massive frame making her appear even smaller in comparison. "My daughter is currently being treated for multiple injuries," Dana cut him off, consulting her tablet. "Some recent, some not so recent." Her gaze traveled over his leather vest, lingering on the Hells Angels patch. Clara shifted uncomfortably beside them, crossing her arms. The tension in the hallway grew thicker with each passing moment. "Mr. Malone," Dana continued, "your lifestyle raises some serious concerns. Association with known criminal organizations, a history of violence." "That's my past," Vince interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "I left that life behind years ago. For Annie." Dana's eyebrows arched skeptically. "And yet here we are, with your 8-year-old daughter displaying signs of long-term physical trauma. The motorcycle accident doesn't explain the older injuries." Vince's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I told the doctors I didn't hurt her. I would never. Mr. Malone, in my experience, children in environments like yours often face unexpected dangers." Dana's tone grew colder. "Whether directly or indirectly, your choices have put Annie at risk." Clara stepped forward. "Ms. Stevens, I've been caring for Annie since she arrived. The way she responds to her father—" "Nurse." Dana glanced at Clara's ID badge. "Stevens? Any relation?" "No," Clara replied firmly, "but I know what I've observed." Dana's lips tightened. "With all due respect, your observations aren't relevant to this investigation. What matters are the facts. And the facts show a pattern of injuries consistent with abuse." Vince's face darkened, a storm brewing behind his eyes. His voice came out as a low growl. "You don't know anything about me or my daughter?" "I know enough," Dana responded, tapping her tablet. "Single father, former gang member, living in a low-income area. Annie's school attendance is spotty at best. No stable employment history." The muscles in Vince's jaw worked as he struggled to contain his anger. "I've done everything for that little girl. Everything." "Perhaps," Dana said, her voice cooling further, "Annie would be better served in a more stable environment. There are several foster families in our system who—" "No!" Vince's shout echoed through the corridor, causing several heads to turn. His eyes flashed with a dangerous mix of fury and terror. "You're not taking my daughter." Clara quickly stepped between them, placing a steady hand on Vince's arm. "Ms. Stevens, surely there are other options we can discuss." "I'm afraid not," Dana replied, unmoved by Vince's outburst. "Given the circumstances, I'll be conducting a full investigation into Mr. Malone's background and Annie's living conditions. Until then, we'll need to restrict his access to Annie." "She needs me," Vince's voice cracked, the anger giving way to desperation. "She'll be scared if she wakes up alone." Dana tucked her tablet under her arm. "Mr. Malone, I suggest you cooperate fully with this investigation. It's the only way you'll have any chance of maintaining custody of your daughter." Vince slumped in the uncomfortable plastic chair of the ER lobby, his large frame making the furniture seem even smaller than it was. The photograph in his weathered hands showed Annie on her last birthday, her gap-toothed smile beaming at the camera as she hugged her favorite stuffed bear. His thumb traced the edge of the worn picture, careful not to smudge it. "What's the point?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've already made up their minds about me." The leather of his vest creaked as he shifted, reaching for his motorcycle jacket draped over the adjacent chair. The familiar squeak of rubber-soled shoes made him pause. Clara appeared, her scrubs slightly rumpled from her long shift, but her eyes were alert and determined. Without asking permission, she settled into the chair next to him. "Going somewhere?" she asked quietly, though they both knew the answer. Vince's jaw tightened. "They're gonna take her anyway. Might as well save everyone the trouble." He gripped the jacket tighter, knuckles white against the black leather. Clara leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "You know what I see when I look at that photo." She gestured to the picture still clutched in his other hand. "I see a little girl who adores her father, who feels safe with him. That doesn't happen by accident." "Yeah?" Vince's voice was rough with emotion. "Tell that to the social worker. All she sees is some thug who can't take care of his kid." He shook his head, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across his face. "Maybe she's right." "Stop that," Clara said firmly. "Annie needs you here, not running away because things got tough." She paused, watching his expression carefully. "The system isn't perfect, but it's not rigged against you either. You just need someone in your corner." Vince let out a bitter laugh. "And who's going to be in my corner? The ex-biker with a rap sheet longer than your arm?" "I will." Clara's words were simple, but carried weight. "I've seen enough in my years here to know the difference between an abusive parent and a loving one. You're rough around the edges, sure, but the way you look at Annie..." She shook her head. "That's real. That's pure love." The jacket in Vince's hands slowly lowered to his lap. His shoulders, which had been tensed for battle, dropped slightly. "They won't believe you either. You're just a nurse." "I'm a witness to your character," Clara corrected him, "and I'm willing to stand up and say so. But I can't help if you walk out that door." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of hospital activity. Vince stared at the photo again, at Annie's innocent smile. "I promised her mom I'd always protect her," he said softly. "Running away. That's not protecting her, is it?" Clara placed a gentle hand on his arm, careful not to startle him. "No, it's not. Stay, Vince. Fight for her. Show them the father I've seen today, the one who'd move heaven and earth for his little girl." Vince drew a deep breath, his massive chest rising and falling. He looked at Clara, really looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. For the first time since Dana Stevens had appeared, some of the tension left his face. "Okay," he said finally, tucking the photo carefully into his vest pocket. "For Annie, I'll stay and fight." He set his jacket back on the empty chair, a simple gesture that carried the weight of a promise. The hospital corridor was quiet, except for the steady beep of distant monitors. Vince had found a secluded corner near the vending machines, away from the watchful eyes of the staff. His phone buzzed in his pocket, displaying an unknown number. Something in his gut told him to ignore it, but his fingers moved on their own, swiping to answer. "Yeah," he answered, his voice low and guarded. "Little brother." The familiar voice on the other end made Vince's blood run cold. Tony's words dripped with false warmth. "Been a while since we had a proper chat." Vince's jaw clenched. "Tony, how'd you get this number?" A dry chuckle crackled through the speaker. "Come on, Vinny. You know I've got friends everywhere. Heard about the accident. How's my favorite niece doing?" Vince's free hand curled into a fist. "Cut the act, Tony. What do you want?" "Always straight to business with you nowadays." Tony clicked his tongue. "Remember when you used to know how to have fun, before you went soft?" There was a pause, heavy with unspoken threats. "The club's calling in your marker, little brother. Time to make good on what you owe." "I don't owe the club anything," Vince growled, keeping his voice down as a nurse passed by. "I'm out. Have been for years." "Nobody's ever really out, Vinny. You know that." Tony's voice hardened. "The debt doesn't just disappear because you decided to play house. 5 years of silence doesn't change what you owe." Vince leaned against the wall, feeling its cold surface through his vest. "I'm not coming back, Tony. I've got Annie to think about now." Ah, yes, sweet little Annie. Tony's tone made Vince's skin crawl. "Wouldn't want anything to happen to her, would we? Streets can be dangerous these days." "Don't." Vince's voice dropped dangerously low. "Don't you dare bring her into this." "You brought her into this the day you walked away," Tony snapped. "Actions have consequences, little brother. You can't just abandon your family, your real family, and expect no payback." "My real family?" Vince's laugh was bitter. "Annie is my family, the only family that matters now. Always the righteous one, aren't you?" Tony's voice dripped with contempt. "Playing daddy while leaving your brothers hanging. Well, time's up. The club needs you back, and you're gonna do what you're told." "No." Vince straightened up, his shoulders squared. "I'm not that person anymore. Find someone else to do your dirty work." "This isn't a request, Vinny. You owe us. And one way or another, you're gonna pay." Vince's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned white. "Stay away from us, Tony. I mean it. You don't give orders anymore, little brother." Tony's voice was cold as ice. "Think about what matters most. We'll be in touch." The line went dead, leaving Vince alone in the quiet corridor. He stared at the phone, feeling the weight of his past pressing down on him like a physical thing. The life he'd worked so hard to leave behind was reaching out with greedy fingers, threatening to pull him back into the darkness. His brother's words echoed in his mind, mixing with the steady beep of hospital monitors. The sound reminded him of Annie, lying in her hospital bed, innocent and vulnerable. Tony knew exactly where to push, where to threaten. The past he'd tried so hard to bury was clawing its way back to the surface, and this time, it wasn't just his life at stake. Clara sat beside Vince in the hospital's small chapel, where they could talk privately. The room was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sounds of hospital life filtering through the door. Afternoon light streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the floor. "You know," Clara said, smoothing her scrubs, "I wasn't always a nurse." She glanced at Vince, who sat with his elbows on his knees, staring at his clasped hands. 10 years ago, I was sleeping in my car, trying to figure out where I'd get my next fix." Vince's eyes flickered toward her, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Tony's threats over and over. Still, something in Clara's voice made him listen. "Prescription pills at first," she continued, her voice steady but soft. "After my husband died, I couldn't sleep. The doctor gave me something to help. Before I knew it, I needed more and more just to get through the day." She traced a small scar on her wrist. "Lost my job, my house, my family's trust, everything." The chapel's silence seemed to deepen. Vince shifted in his seat, recognizing the weight of shame in her words. It was the same weight he carried. "My rock bottom?" Clara gave a bitter laugh. "Found myself in this very hospital. Overdose. When I woke up, everyone looked at me the same way they looked at you when you first walked in. Like I was something dangerous, something broken." Vince's phone felt heavy in his pocket, Tony's words still echoing in his head. He wanted to focus on Clara's story, but images of Annie kept flashing through his mind. Annie hurt, Annie scared, Annie in danger because of his past. "But one nurse," Clara continued, "she saw past all that, helped me get into rehab, supported me when I decided to go back to school." She turned to face Vince fully. "That's why I became a nurse, Because someone gave me a second chance when nobody else would. Vince rubbed his face with his hands. It's different, he muttered. Your past isn't trying to drag you back in. Isn't it? Clara's voice was gentle but firm. Every day, I work with medications that could take me right back to where I was. The temptation never really goes away. But you know what keeps me straight? She paused until Vince looked at her. Knowing that I'm worth more than my worst mistakes. And so are you, Vince. He shook his head, Tony's threats weighing heavily on his mind. You don't understand. These people, my brother, they don't just let you walk away. Maybe not, Clara agreed, but Annie needs her father. Not the man you used to be, but the man you are now. The one who burst through those ER doors ready to do anything to save his daughter. Vince's shoulders tensed as he remembered that desperate moment. I can't lose her, he whispered. Then focus on her future, not your past. Whatever's coming, face it as the father you are now, not the man you used to be. Before Vince could respond, movement caught his eye. Through the chapel's doorway, a familiar silhouette passed. By a man in a leather cut, trying too hard to look casual. Another followed shortly after, Tony's men, watching, waiting. The message was clear. His brother wasn't going to wait forever for an answer. Clara noticed his sudden stillness. Vince? What's wrong? But Vince just stared at the doorway, his jaw clenched, knowing that his past wasn't just catching up. It was already here. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Vince made his way down the hospital corridor toward Annie's room. His boots, usually heavy and confident on the ground, seemed to drag with each step. The weight of Tony's threats and Clara's words tangled in his mind. But seeing Annie was all that mattered now. Dr. Roberts stood outside Annie's room, reviewing her chart. He looked up as Vince approached. Mr. Malone, he said, his voice professional but gentle. Annie's vitals are stable, which is good news. The swelling in her brain has gone down considerably. Vince's shoulders relaxed slightly. When will she wake up? That's hard to say. Dr. Roberts adjusted his glasses. The body heals at its own pace. The important thing is that she's responding well to treatment. Vince nodded, his throat tight. Can I sit with her? Of course. Dr. Roberts stepped aside, allowing Vince to enter the room. The sight of Annie in the hospital bed made his heart ache. She looked so small among the white sheets, her dark hair spread across the pillow. Various machines beeped steadily around her, monitoring her vital signs. An IV dripped clear fluid into her arm. Vince pulled a chair close to her bedside and took her tiny hand in his. It felt warm, alive, and that gave him hope. Hey, princess, he said softly, his gruff voice barely above a whisper. Remember that time when you were 4 and you insisted on wearing your Halloween costume to the grocery store? He smiled at the memory. You were determined to be Wonder Woman that day. Wouldn't take the costume off for anything. He stroked her hand with his thumb, careful of the IV line. The cashier played along, asked you to save her from the evil shopping cart. You struck your superhero pose right there in the checkout line. His voice cracked slightly. You've always been my little hero, Annie, always so brave. The memories flowed easily now, each one a testament to their life together. Remember when we planted those sunflowers in the backyard? You checked on them every morning, talked to them like they were your friends, and they grew taller than you that summer. He squeezed her hand gently. You need to grow strong like those sunflowers, baby. You need to come back to me. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes, Vince stood up. His back ached from sitting in the uncomfortable chair, but he didn't mind. He leaned down and kissed Annie's forehead. As he stepped into the hallway, voices drifted from around the corner. He recognized Clara's voice, speaking with another nurse. "The pattern of injuries," the other nurse was saying. "It's consistent with self-harm. Look at the placement of the bruises, the defensive wounds." "That can't be right," Clara responded, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Vince's blood ran cold. He rounded the corner, his face pale. "What did you just say?" The nurse who had been speaking startled, clutching her clipboard to her chest. Without a word, she turned and walked quickly down the hallway, her shoes squeaking against the polished floor. "What did she mean, self-harm?" Vince demanded, his voice hoarse with fear. But the nurse was already gone, leaving him standing there with his heart pounding and his mind racing with terrible possibilities. He turned to Clara, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. She couldn't have... But the words wouldn't come, and the uncertainty in Clara's face only made his fear grow stronger. The hospital corridors felt suffocating as Vince paced back and forth in the waiting area. His large frame cast shifting shadows under the dim evening lights. The words self-harm echoed in his mind like a twisted melody he couldn't shake. His fists clenched and unclenched rhythmically, knuckles white with tension. Clara approached him, her nurse's shoes making soft, squeaking sounds on the linoleum floor. "Vince, we need to talk about..." "Talk?" His voice came out as a growl. "Everyone wants to talk. The doctors, the social worker, you." He spun around to face her, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and anger. "While my little girl lies in there, not waking up, everyone just wants to talk." Clara didn't back away. "I'm trying to help you." "Help me?" Vince's voice rose, drawing concerned looks from the night staff. "You think you understand what I'm going through? My daughter's hurt. They're saying she did this to herself, and my brother..." He caught himself, but the dam had already broken. "You don't know what it's like," he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. "Everyone looking at me like I'm some kind of monster. The doctors, the nurses, they see these tattoos, this vest, and they've already decided who I am." He gestured wildly at his Hell's Angels vest. "You think you know me because we had a few conversations? Because you dealt with your own demons?" Clara's face hardened. "No, I don't know exactly what you're going through," she said firmly. "But I know what it's like to have your past haunting you, trying to drag you back down. You can't keep running from it, Vince." "Running?" Vince laughed bitterly. "I've been doing everything but running. I've been fighting every single day to keep Annie safe, to give her a normal life." "Then fight now!" Clara stepped closer, her voice intense but controlled. "Stop pushing away the people who want to help you. Whatever's happening with your brother, whatever's really going on with Annie's injuries, you need to face it head on." Vince's shoulders slumped, the anger draining from him like air from a balloon. "You don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Some things you can't face without destroying everything else." He turned away from Clara, his boots heavy on the floor as he walked toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open with a whoosh, and the cold night air hit his face like a slap. He took deep breaths, trying to clear his head, trying to think straight. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered under the yellow sodium lights. Vince walked aimlessly, not sure where he was going, just knowing he needed space, needed to escape the suffocating weight of everything pressing down on him. Then he heard it. The distinctive rumble of motorcycles, a sound he knew as well as his own heartbeat. The roar grew louder, echoing off the hospital walls. 3 bikes appeared at the entrance to the parking lot, their riders wearing familiar colors. They spread out, blocking his path to the street. The lead rider cut his engine, the sudden silence more threatening than the noise. Vince's jaw clenched. He recognized these men, Tony's enforcers, his message carriers. Vince planted his feet firmly on the asphalt. His hands balled into fists at his sides, but his voice was steady when he spoke to himself. "Not going back," he muttered. "Not now. Not ever." Vince trudged back into the hospital, his shoulders tense from the encounter in the parking lot. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across his weathered face. As he approached Annie's room, a man in a crisp suit stood waiting, a manila folder tucked under his arm. "Mr. Malone?" The man's voice was clipped, professional. "I'm Dr. Matthews, the hospital administrator. We need to discuss your daughter's situation." Vince's jaw tightened. He'd been expecting this, but it didn't make it any easier. "What about my daughter?" Dr. Matthews opened the folder, revealing documents filled with highlighted sections. "We've received some concerning information about your background, Mr. Malone. Your association with the Hells Angels, multiple arrests in your youth." "That was years ago," Vince cut in, his voice rough with emotion. "I left that life behind." "Nevertheless," Dr. Matthews continued, "we have a responsibility to ensure Annie's safety and well-being. Given your history and the nature of her injuries, "I would never hurt my daughter," Vince's voice boomed through the corridor, causing a nearby nurse to jump. He took a deep breath, trying to control his rising anger. "Annie is everything to me, everything." "Mr. Malone, please lower your voice." Dr. Matthews adjusted his tie nervously. "We're simply following protocol. The pattern of injuries, your background, the social worker's preliminary report, it all raises red flags." Vince's hands trembled as he ran them through his beard. The walls seemed to close in around him, the fluorescent lights growing brighter, more accusatory. "You don't know anything about me or my daughter. That's precisely the problem," Dr. Matthews replied. "What we do know is concerning enough to warrant—" "To warrant what?" Vince stepped closer, his massive frame towering over the administrator. "To take my daughter away? To destroy the only family she has left?" Clara appeared at the end of the hallway, quickly moving towards them. But before she could intervene, Vince's phone buzzed in his pocket. He recognized the number immediately. Tony. "This isn't over," Vince growled at Dr. Matthews, then turned away to answer the call. "Brother," Tony's voice oozed through the speaker, smooth as oil and twice as toxic. "We need to talk, face to face." Vince moved to a quiet corner, his voice low. "I told you I'm done with that life." "This isn't about that life, Vince, it's about Annie." Tony's voice hardened. "Meet me alone. The old warehouse on 5th. 1 hour." Vince's free hand curled into a fist. He knew meeting Tony alone was dangerous. His brother hadn't exactly been understanding about his departure from the Angels. But with the hospital administrators breathing down his neck and Annie's future hanging by a thread, what choice did he have? "If this is some kind of trick—" "No tricks," Tony interrupted. "Just two brothers having a chat about family. 1 hour, Vince. Don't make me wait." Vince stared at his phone for a long moment after Tony hung up. Behind him, he could hear Dr. Matthews talking with Clara, their voices low but urgent. The weight of everything, Annie's injuries, the suspicion, Tony's sudden involvement, pressed down on him like a physical force. "Fine," he muttered, typing a quick response to Tony. 1 hour. Alone. The neon sign of Jerry's Diner flickered weakly in the darkness, casting intermittent red light across the cracked pavement. Vince's boots crunched on broken glass as he approached the abandoned building. His brother Tony sat inside at a dusty booth, looking perfectly at ease in the derelict space. Vince pushed open the door, its rusty hinges protesting. The smell of mold and decades-old grease hit him as he stepped inside. His massive frame cast a long shadow across the dirty floor. "Little brother?" Tony smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Sit down. Let's talk like family." Vince remained standing, his hands loose at his sides. "Say what you need to say, Tony. Always so serious." Tony drummed his fingers on the sticky table. "Remember when we used to come here after rides? Best burgers in town." "That was a long time ago?" Tony's expression hardened. "Everything was better back then, wasn't it? When you were still loyal to your brothers, when you understood what family really meant." "I know exactly what family means," Vince growled. "It's why I'm at the hospital with my daughter instead of here playing games with you." "Games?" Tony stood up slowly. "You think this is a game? You owe us, Vince. The Angels don't forget debts. We protected you when you needed it, helped you rise through the, ranks. And then you just walked away." "I had no choice. After Sarah died." "You always have a choice!" Tony's fist crashed down on the table. "And now you've got one last chance to make the right one. Come back to us. Help us with a few jobs, settle your debt, or—" Vince's eyes narrowed. "Or what?" "Or things might get complicated for little Annie." Tony's voice was soft, almost gentle. "Hospitals can be dangerous places. Accidents happen." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vince took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists. "If you go near my daughter, you'll what?" Tony spread his arms wide. "Beat me up? Kill me? That would just prove everyone right about you, wouldn't it? The violent biker who can't escape his past. How long do you think you'd keep custody of Annie then?" Vince's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. "I'm done with that life, Tony. Done with the violence, the crime, all of it. Find someone else to do your dirty work." "There is no done, little brother." Tony walked around the table, stopping inches from Vince. "The Angels are family for life. You know that. And family takes care of its own." "My only family is Annie now." Tony's face darkened. "Then for Annie's sake, I hope you reconsider. Because right now she's not safe. Not in that hospital, not anywhere." He brushed past Vince, heading for the door. "Think about it, brother. But don't take too long." Vince stood alone in the empty diner, his brother's words echoing in his head. The flickering neon outside cast strange shadows that seemed to dance and mock him. With heavy steps, he turned and walked out, heading back to the hospital where Annie lay waiting. His brother's threat hung in the air like poison, following him all the way back to the sterile halls where his daughter slept, unaware of the darkness gathering around her. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Vince made his way back to Annie's hospital room. His boots squeaked against the polished floor, each step heavy with the weight of Tony's threats. Annie lay peacefully in her bed, the steady beep of monitors marking time in the quiet room. Vince lowered himself into the chair beside her bed, his large frame making the plastic chair creak. He took Annie's small hand in his, careful not to disturb the IV line. Her skin felt cool against his calloused palm. "I'm here, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Daddy's right here." The door opened softly, and Clara stepped in, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. She handed one to Vince, then settled into the chair on the other side of Annie's bed. The warmth of the coffee couldn't chase away the chill that had settled in Vince's bones after his meeting with Tony. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Clara said quietly, studying his face. Vince stared into his coffee, watching the steam rise. "Maybe I have." He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging. "My past, it's not just going to stay buried. They're coming for me, and I'm afraid—" His voice caught. "I'm afraid Annie will pay the price." Clara leaned forward, her eyes filled with understanding. "Who's coming for you, Vince?" "My brother. The Angels." He squeezed Annie's hand gently. "I thought I could just walk away, start fresh. But they don't let go that easily." "Neither do fathers who love their daughters," Clara said firmly. She reached across Annie's bed and placed her hand on Vince's arm. "You're not alone in this fight, Vince. We'll figure something out." Vince looked up at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. For the first time since Tony's threats, he felt a glimmer of hope. "Why are you helping me? Most people see the vest, the tattoos, and run the other way." "Because I see more than that," Clara replied softly. "I see a father who would move heaven and earth for his daughter. That's the man I choose to believe in." The moment was interrupted by the sharp click of heels on linoleum. Dana Stevens appeared in the doorway, her face set in professional neutrality. She carried a manila folder under one arm and was flanked by 2 uniformed security guards. "Mr. Malone," she said, her voice clipped and formal. "I need to speak with you regarding Annie's custody situation." Vince's grip on Annie's hand tightened slightly. "What about it?" "Our investigation has raised several concerns about Annie's safety and well-being." Dana opened her folder, pulling out an official-looking document. "Given your history with the Hells Angels and the nature of Annie's injuries, we've determined it's in her best interest to be placed in temporary protective custody until our review is complete." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Vince stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You can't do this. She needs me." "I can and I must," Dana replied. "It's standard procedure when there's suspected abuse and potential ongoing danger to the child." "This is wrong," Clara interjected, standing as well. "Annie needs her father right now." Dana's expression didn't waver. "The decision has been made. Once Annie is medically cleared for transfer, she'll be moved to a secure facility under state protection." Vince felt the world crumbling around him. His vision blurred, and he could barely hear Clara's continued protests over the roaring in his ears. He looked down at Annie's peaceful face, knowing that soon he wouldn't be able to watch over her, to protect her. "Please," he whispered, but Dana was already turning away, leaving him standing there with his daughter's hand in his, and his heart breaking into pieces. The hospital room felt smaller by the minute. Vince paced back and forth, his heavy boots wearing an invisible path in the linoleum floor. Every few steps, he'd glance at Annie's sleeping form, then at the clock on the wall, counting down the minutes until they'd take her away. Clara stood by the door, watching him with growing concern. "Vince, you need to sit down. Getting worked up isn't going to help Annie." "They're going to take her," he growled, running his hands through his beard. "Everything I've done to keep her safe, to give her a good life, they're just going to throw it away because of who I used to be." "The system isn't perfect," Clara said softly, stepping closer. "But if you fight it, you'll only make things worse. We can appeal the decision, get you a lawyer." "A lawyer?" Vince's laugh was bitter. "You think they'll listen to anything a lawyer says about an ex-Hells Angel?" He stopped pacing, his eyes fixed on Annie. "Tony knows where she is. The minute they move her to some state facility, she'll be vulnerable." Clara moved between Vince and Annie's bed. "Think this through. If you take her now, you'll never stop running. Is that the life you want for her?" Vince's jaw clenched. Better running than dead. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Or back in Tony's reach." "Please," Clara pleaded, placing a hand on his arm. "Trust me. We can fight this the right way." For a moment, Vince seemed to consider her words. Then his eyes hardened with determination. "I'm sorry, Clara. I can't take that chance." In one fluid motion, he stepped around Clara and disconnected Annie's IV with surprising gentleness. The monitors began to beep in protest as he carefully gathered his daughter in his arms, cradling her against his chest like she was made of glass. "Vince, don't!" Clara's voice cracked with emotion. "You're making a terrible mistake." "The only mistake would be leaving her here," he said, his voice thick. Annie stirred slightly in his arms but didn't wake. I promised her mother I'd protect her. That's what I'm doing." Clara reached for the nurse call button, her hand trembling. "If you do this, there's no going back. They'll hunt you down." "Let them try." Vince adjusted Annie in his arms, making sure her hospital gown covered her properly. "You've been kind to us, Clara. I won't forget that." As Vince moved toward the door, Clara pressed the call button. Alarms began blaring throughout the ward, their sharp warning piercing the quiet hospital air. The sound of running feet echoed down the hallway. "Please?" Clara made one last attempt, tears in her eyes. "Don't throw everything away. We can protect her together." Vince paused in the doorway, Annie's head resting against his shoulder. For a brief moment, doubt flickered across his face. Then the sound of security radio chatter reached them, and his expression hardened once more. "I'm her father," he said simply. "This is what fathers do." With that, he turned and strode down the hallway, his powerful frame moving with surprising speed despite his precious cargo. Behind him, Clara's voice joined the chorus of shouts and alarms, begging him to stop. But Vince kept moving, driven by a desperate father's love and the terrifying certainty that this was his only choice. Hospital staff scattered before him as he made his way toward the exit, some frozen in shock, others reaching for phones to call security. The automatic doors loomed ahead, promising escape or disaster. The hospital hallway erupted in chaos. Security guards blocked both ends of the corridor, their faces stern and determined. Vince clutched Annie closer, his muscles tensing as he looked for an escape route. Clara stood beside him, her breath coming in quick gasps. "Sir, put the girl down," one of the guards commanded, taking a step forward. "Don't make this worse than it already is." Vince backed against the wall, his eyes darting between the approaching guards. Annie stirred in his arms, making a small whimpering sound that tore at his heart. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the scene, making everything feel surreal and threatening. "Just listen to them," Clara whispered, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. A sharp whistle cut through the tension. Everyone turned to see a nurse standing in a doorway, her scrubs wrinkled from a long shift. She gestured urgently with her hand. "This way, quick!" Vince hesitated for a split second, but the sound of more footsteps approaching made his decision for him. He darted toward the door, Clara close behind. The nurse ushered them through what looked like a storage room, past shelves stacked with medical supplies. "I heard everything," the nurse explained, as they hurried through the dimly lit space. "My brother was in the Angels too. Sometimes good people get caught in bad situations." They emerged into a service corridor that smelled of bleach and industrial cleaner. The nurse led them down a series of turns, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter with each corner they rounded. Finally, they reached a metal door marked Emergency Exit. "The loading dock is just outside," the nurse said, pushing the door open. "There's usually no one there this time of night." Vince paused, shifting Annie's weight in his arms. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I won't forget this." The night air hit them like a wave as they stepped outside. The loading dock was empty except for a few parked cars, including Vince's motorcycle. Clara looked at the bike, then at Annie's unconscious form. "We can't take her on that," she said. "She needs to be somewhere secure." Vince nodded toward a modest sedan parked nearby. "That yours?" Clara fumbled in her pocket for her keys. "Yes, but—" She stopped, realizing what she was about to agree to. After a moment's hesitation, she pressed the unlock button. The car's lights flashed in response. They got Annie settled in the back seat, Vince arranging his leather jacket around her like a blanket. His hands lingered on her face, checking her temperature, making sure she was comfortable. The mounting fear of what lay ahead pressed against his chest like a physical weight. Clara slid into the passenger seat, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her purse. "I can't believe I'm doing this," she muttered. Vince took the driver's seat, adjusting it to accommodate his large frame. The engine started with a quiet purr, nothing like his motorcycle's familiar roar. As they pulled away from the hospital, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The streets were nearly empty, streetlights casting pools of yellow light on the wet pavement. Vince drove carefully, hyper-aware of every traffic law, knowing that one mistake could bring everything crashing down. His mind raced with possibilities, where they could go, how to keep Annie safe, what their next move should be. Clara broke the tense silence. "We might have just made everything worse by running," she said softly, staring out at the dark streets sliding past. The abandoned warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows like dark, hollow eyes staring down at them. Vince parked Clara's car behind some old shipping crates, hiding it from view. The sound of motorcycles rumbled in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. "You should stay here with Annie," Vince said, his voice tight with worry. Clara shook her head. "No, we're in this together now." She squeezed his arm, her touch gentle but firm. They stepped out of the car, leaving Annie sleeping in the back seat. The warehouse door creaked as they entered, their footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. Moonlight filtered through the broken windows, casting long shadows across stacks of forgotten crates and rusted machinery. Tony stood in the center of the space, flanked by 4 burly men in Hell's Angels colors. His leather vest gleamed in the dim light, and a cruel smile played across his face. "Little brother," he said, spreading his arms wide. "Finally decided to come home?" "This isn't home anymore, Tony." Vince's voice was steady, but Clara could see his fists clenching at his sides. "It hasn't been for a long time." Tony's smile faded. "You owe us. The Angels don't forget debts." "I don't owe you anything," Vince growled. "And you stay away from Annie." Tony's eyes flickered to Clara, then back to Vince. "Sweet setup you've got going. Playing house with the nurse, pretending you're something you're not." He took a step forward. "But we both know what you really are, brother. Once an angel, always an angel." "People change," Clara spoke up, her voice stronger than she felt. Tony's laugh echoed through the warehouse. "Stay out of this, sweetheart. This is family business." "She is family," Vince said, moving slightly in front of Clara. "More than you've been lately." Tony's face darkened. "Last chance, Vince. Come back to us, or things get ugly for you and that little girl." Something snapped in Vince. He surged forward, his voice thundering through the warehouse. "You leave her out of this." Tony's men moved in, but Vince was ready. Years of fighting experience took over as he blocked the first punch, driving his fist into the attacker's stomach. Another man grabbed him from behind, but Vince threw his head back, connecting with the man's nose with a sickening crunch. Clara backed, away as the fight escalated, her heart pounding. She watched as Vince fought like a man possessed, his movements precise and powerful. One by one, Tony's men fell back, nursing various injuries. Tony himself hadn't moved, watching the scene with cold calculation. When the last of his men stumbled away, he pulled out a phone. "One call, brother. One call, and Annie goes into the system. You'll never see her again." "No," Vince said, breathing hard. "You're done threatening my family." He advanced on Tony, his presence overwhelming. "I'm not that person anymore, and if you ever come near Annie again, I'll forget I was ever your brother." The threat hung in the air between them. Tony's jaw clenched, but something in Vince's eyes made him step back. "This isn't over," he spat, backing toward the door. "The angels don't forget, Vince, remember that." Tony and his men retreated, the sound of their motorcycles fading into the night. Vince stood still, his shoulders heaving, until Clara touched his arm. "We need to get back to the hospital," she said softly. Vince nodded, the fight draining from his body. They walked back to the car in silence, both knowing they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Annie was still sleeping peacefully in the back seat, unaware of the battle that had just been fought for her future. The fluorescent lights of the hospital conference room cast harsh shadows as Clara gathered the small group of allies. Dr. Thompson, the head of pediatrics, sat with his arms crossed, his white coat wrinkled from a long shift. Next to him, Sarah from social work shuffled through papers, while two nurses, Mike and Jenny, leaned against the wall. "We need to help Vince keep Annie," Clara said, her voice firm. "I know what you've all seen and heard, but there's more to the story." Dr. Thompson nodded slowly. "I've reviewed Annie's case thoroughly. The injuries don't match typical abuse patterns, and I've seen how Vince is with her. That's not the behavior of an abuser." Sarah spread several documents on the table. "I've pulled some strings and gotten access to Vince's records. Yes, he has a criminal past with the Hells Angels, but there's been nothing since Annie was born, not even a parking ticket. I see them together during my night shifts," Jenny added, twisting her ID badge nervously. "He reads to her, even when she's sleeping, brings her favorite stuffed animal from home. Those aren't the actions of someone who doesn't care." Mike pushed himself off the wall. "Look, I was skeptical at first. Big, scary biker guy, you know? But I've watched him. He knows all her allergies, her favorite foods, even which arm she prefers for blood draws. That's a dedicated father." Clara smiled, grateful for their support. "The problem is Dana Stevens from CPS. She's determined to take Annie away based solely on Vince's past." "Then we document everything," Dr. Thompson said firmly. "Every positive interaction, every sign of proper care. We build a case showing Vince is a fit parent." Sarah nodded, pulling out more papers. "I can help with the legal side. There are precedents for reformed individuals maintaining custody. We just need to prove Vince's change is genuine and permanent." "Which it is," Clara insisted. She thought of Vince's desperate fight to protect Annie, his willingness to face his violent brother to keep her safe. He's not that person anymore. The group spent the next hour planning their strategy. Jenny would document all father-daughter interactions during her shifts. Mike would compile Annie's medical records, showing consistent checkups and care. Dr. Thompson agreed to write a formal letter supporting Vince's custody, while Sarah would prepare the legal documentation. When they finished, Clara found Vince in Annie's room. He sat in his usual chair, holding his daughter's small hand. Dark circles under his eyes showed his exhaustion, but his gaze remained vigilant. "Vince," Clara said softly, touching his shoulder. "We need to talk." He followed her to the hallway, casting one last look at Annie. His shoulders were tense, expecting more bad news. "The hospital is behind you," Clara said, watching hope flicker in his tired eyes. "We're going to help you keep Annie. Dr. Thompson, Sarah from social work, the nurses, they all see what kind of father you really are." Vince's tough exterior cracked slightly. "They believe me?" "They believe in you," Clara corrected. "We're putting together documentation, character witnesses, everything needed to fight the CPS case. You're not alone in this anymore." For a moment, Vince struggled to speak, emotion thick in his throat. Finally, he managed a rough, "Thank you." Clara squeezed his arm. "You're a good father, Vince, and we're going to make sure everyone else sees that, too." They stood together in the quiet hallway, watching Annie sleep through the door window. For the first time since this nightmare began, They had a plan, and more importantly, they had hope. The hospital corridor felt different that morning. Vince sat in his usual spot outside Annie's room, his large frame somehow looking smaller in the plastic chair. Clara stood nearby, organizing patient charts at the nurse's station, keeping a watchful eye on him. The sharp click of heels against linoleum made them both look up. Dana Stevens approached, her usual stern expression replaced by something else. Concern, perhaps even guilt. She clutched a thick manila folder to her chest. "Mr. Malone," she said, her voice softer than usual. "We need to talk." Vince tensed, his hands gripping the armrests. "I'm not leaving, Annie. That's not why I'm here." Dana glanced around the hallway, then gestured toward an empty consultation room. "Please, this is important." Clara caught Vince's eye and nodded encouragingly. He stood, following Dana into the small room. The social worker closed the door behind them and laid the folder on the table. "I've been investigating your case," Dana began, spreading out several documents. "Not just your history, but recent events, and I found something concerning about your brother, Tony Malone." Vince's jaw tightened at the mention of his brother's name. Dana continued, pulling out police reports and surveillance photos. "Tony's been under investigation for extortion, drug trafficking, and violent crimes. My contacts in law enforcement showed me this." She pushed forward a photograph of Tony meeting with known criminals. "He's not just a threat to society. He's specifically been targeting you and Annie." Vince stared at the evidence before him, his face a mask of controlled anger. "I tried to tell you. I left that life behind because of Annie." "I know that now," Dana admitted, her professional facade cracking slightly. "I was wrong to judge you solely on your past. The evidence shows Tony's been trying to force you back into criminal activity by threatening Annie's safety." Vince's fists clenched on the table. "So now you believe me?" "Yes," Dana said firmly, "but I need your help. We can protect Annie, but only if you work with me. I need you to tell me everything, about Tony, about the threats, about what really happened the day Annie was injured." Vince stood abruptly, pacing the small room. His leather vest creaked as he moved, a reminder of the life he'd left behind. "If I talk, Tony will know. He's got people everywhere." "We can protect you both," Dana assured him, "but only if you trust me. I can help you maintain custody of Annie and keep her safe from Tony, but you have to be completely honest with me." Vince stopped pacing, looking through the window at Annie's room across the hall. His daughter lay there, still recovering, innocent to the danger that surrounded her. Clara caught his gaze through the glass and gave him an encouraging nod. "I've spent years trying to protect her from my past," Vince said quietly, "trying to be better than what I was." "And you have been," Dana replied. "Everything I've seen here, how you care for her, how the hospital staff defends you, shows me that. But now you need to let us help you protect her." Vince turned back to Dana, his expression resolute but wary. "If I do this, you'll help keep her safe, keep her with me?" Dana nodded solemnly. "You have my word. We'll do this properly, legally. We'll make sure Tony can't hurt either of you again." Vince sank back into his chair, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. After a long moment, he nodded slowly. "All right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'll tell you everything." The steady beep of hospital monitors filled the quiet room. Afternoon sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, casting warm stripes across Annie's bed. Vince hadn't left her side for hours, his large hand gently holding her smaller one. His weathered face showed the strain of sleepless nights, but his eyes never left his daughter's face. Clara stood in the doorway, checking Annie's vitals for the 100th time that day. The girl's condition had been improving steadily, but they all waited anxiously for her to wake up. Other nurses and hospital staff occasionally paused as they passed by, drawn by the touching sight of the intimidating biker so tenderly watching over his little girl. "Hey, princess," Vince whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I need you to know something." He leaned closer, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You made me want to be better, to do better." His voice cracked slightly. "I love you more than anything in this world." Clara stepped into the room, adjusting Annie's IV line. She placed a gentle hand on Vince's shoulder, offering silent support. The tough exterior he usually wore had crumbled completely in these quiet moments with his daughter. A slight flutter of movement caught their attention. Annie's fingers twitched in Vince's hand. Her eyelids began to move, and a small sound escaped her lips. Vince straightened, hope lighting up his tired face. "Annie?" he called softly, squeezing her hand. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" Clara quickly moved to check Annie's vital signs, her professional calm masking her own excitement. Other staff members gathered at the doorway, drawn by the commotion. Annie's eyes slowly opened, blinking against the afternoon light. Her gaze wandered the room before settling on her father's face. For a moment, confusion clouded her features as she took in her surroundings. "It's okay, baby," Vince soothed, his voice gentle despite his massive frame. "You're safe. I'm right here." Tears welled up in Annie's eyes as recognition dawned. Her small hand tightened around her father's fingers. She tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper after days of silence. Clara quickly offered her a small sip of water, helping her wet her dry lips. The room held its collective breath as Annie found her voice. A weak smile spread across her pale face as she looked up at Vince. "Daddy," she whispered, the word filled with trust and love. Vince's tough facade crumbled completely. Tears rolled down his cheeks as he carefully gathered his daughter into his arms, mindful of her injuries. Annie nestled against his chest, exactly where she belonged. Clara wiped away her own tears as she watched father and daughter reunite. The other hospital staff members smiled, touched by the scene before them. In that moment, no one saw a former Hell's Angel or a tough biker. They saw only a father's pure, unconditional love for his little girl. Annie's small hand reached up to touch Vince's wet cheek, her eyes full of complete trust and adoration. "Daddy," she whispered again, and in that single word was everything Vince had ever needed to hear. The morning sun streamed through the hospital windows as Vince sat in a small conference room, his massive frame making the office chair seem tiny. Across from him, Dana Stevens spread out paperwork across the table, her earlier suspicion replaced with determination to help. "These are the steps we need to take," Dana explained, pointing to various documents. "It won't be easy, but we'll make sure Annie stays with you legally and safely." Vince nodded, his weathered hands carefully picking up each paper. The legal language confused him, but he was ready to tackle anything for his daughter. "Whatever it takes," he said, his voice firm. "I'll do whatever you need me to." Clara knocked softly and entered the room with a fresh cup of coffee for Vince. She'd been helping coordinate between the hospital administration and social services, vouching for the changes she'd witnessed in him. "We've already started the process," Dana continued, checking off items on her list. "You'll need to attend parenting classes, undergo regular check-ins with social services, and maintain stable employment." She paused, making sure Vince understood. "Most importantly, you'll need to formally sever all ties with your previous associations." Vince's jaw tightened, but he didn't hesitate. "Already done. I'm meeting with a lawyer tomorrow about legally documenting my separation from the Angels." He glanced toward Annie's room, where she was resting. That life's behind me now. The hospital's head administrator, Dr. Thompson, joined them, carrying more paperwork. Where once he'd viewed Vince with suspicion, now his expression showed respect. The hospital is prepared to provide documentation supporting your care and dedication to Annie during her stay here, he said, placing the papers on the table. Several staff members have volunteered to serve as character witnesses if needed. Clara smiled, remembering how the entire pediatric ward had signed a petition supporting Vince's custody of Annie. The same nurses who had once whispered in fear now defended him fiercely to anyone who questioned his devotion to his daughter. I've also enrolled in GED classes, Vince added, pulling out a crumpled registration form from his pocket. Found a program that works around Annie's schedule, and I've got a job interview at Miller's Auto Shop next week. His voice carried a quiet pride. The owner's sister is one of the nurses here. She put in a good word. Dana nodded approvingly, noting everything down. This is exactly what we need to see, Mr. Malone. You're taking concrete steps to create a stable environment for Annie. Through the conference room window, they could see Annie in her hospital bed, surrounded by get-well cards and stuffed animals from the hospital staff. She was sitting up now, coloring in a book one of the nurses had brought her, her face peaceful and secure in the knowledge that her father was nearby. The support you've built here is remarkable, Dana observed, watching various staff members stop by Annie's room to check on her. It speaks volumes about the changes you've made. Vince's tough exterior softened as he watched his daughter. They gave me a chance, he said quietly. Saw past what I looked like, what I used to be. He turned to Clara and Dr. Thompson. Saw what was really important. The hospital staff moving past the conference room no longer saw a threatening biker. Instead, they smiled and waved, some stopping to share updates about Annie's recovery. Vince had become part of their community, his dedication to his daughter transforming how they saw him. The construction site hummed with activity as Vince adjusted his yellow hard hat. Sweat trickled down his neck in the morning heat. But he didn't mind. His muscles ached from honest work, a feeling that brought him peace. The foreman, Mike, had taken a chance on him despite his appearance, and Vince was determined to prove himself worthy of that trust. "Looking good up there, Malone," Mike called from below, checking the progress on the framework. "You've got a natural talent for this." Vince allowed himself a small smile as he secured another beam. The other workers had been wary at first, but his quiet dedication and willingness to learn had earned their respect. During lunch breaks, they'd share stories about their families, and Vince would talk about Annie's recovery with pride in his voice. After his shift, Vince headed to the hospital, his work boots still dusty. He found Clara at her usual station, updating patient charts. She looked up as he approached, her face brightening. "How was work today?" she asked, setting aside her paperwork. "Good," Vince replied, settling into the chair beside her desk. "Mike says I might get certified for crane operations soon." He rubbed his calloused hands together. "Better money in that." Clara nodded, understanding what he wasn't saying. Better ability to provide for Annie. "Speaking of Annie," she said, "Dr. Thompson thinks she might be ready for discharge next week." Vince's eyes lit up, though anxiety crept into his voice. "You think I'm ready?" "I know you are," Clara assured him, touching his arm gently. "You've been here every day, learning her care routine, asking questions. You're more prepared than most parents." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both aware of how far they'd come from that first terrifying night in the ER. Clara had become more than just Annie's nurse. She was their anchor, someone who believed in Vince when even he doubted himself. "I've been thinking," Vince said slowly, about getting an apartment closer to the hospital, somewhere with a park nearby. He pulled out a rental listing he'd printed at the library. "It's not much, but—" Clara studied the listing, then smiled. "It's perfect, Vince. Annie will love being near the playground." Later that afternoon, with Clara's encouragement and the doctor's permission, Vince took Annie for their first walk outside the hospital grounds. Annie's small hand felt warm in his as they made their way down the sidewalk. She was still weak from her long hospital stay, but her steps grew more confident with each block. They found a bench in a small garden area, and Annie pointed excitedly at a butterfly fluttering nearby. "Look, Daddy!" she exclaimed, her face glowing with joy. Vince watched his daughter, remembering how pale and still she had been just weeks ago. Now her cheeks were pink with health, her eyes bright with curiosity. The fear that had gripped him since that terrible night began to loosen its hold. "Can we come here again tomorrow?" Annie asked, leaning against his arm. "Sure can, Princess," Vince replied, his voice rough with emotion. "We can come whenever you want." The afternoon sun warmed their faces as they sat together, watching the butterfly dance from flower to flower. For the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't running from anything. They weren't hiding. They were just a father and daughter, enjoying a simple moment together, looking forward to many more to come. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Vince's new apartment as he sorted through the mail. His calloused fingers paused on a plain white envelope with no return address. Something about its weight made his stomach turn. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper, folded crisp and neat. Tony's jagged handwriting stretched across the page. "The past never truly dies, little brother. You can pretend all you want, but blood is blood. We'll see each other again." Vince's hands trembled as he read the words again. The paper felt heavy, like it carried the weight of all his past mistakes. From Annie's bedroom down the hall, he could hear her humming while she did her homework. The sound anchored him, reminding him of everything he had to protect. He sank into his worn armchair, the letter hanging loose in his grip. Memories flooded back, the roar of motorcycles, the metallic taste of fear, the countless nights spent doing Tony's bidding. Back then, the Brotherhood had meant everything. The patches on their vests had been worth dying for, worth killing for. But that was before Annie. Before he'd held his daughter in his arms and promised to be better than the life he'd known. "Daddy?" Annie's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her math workbook clutched to her chest. "Can you help me with fractions?" Vince quickly folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. "Sure can, Princess. Come here." Annie climbed onto his lap, spreading her workbook across his knees. Her dark hair fell forward as she pointed to a problem, and Vince caught the fading scent of hospital soap. She was still recovering, still healing, but getting stronger every day. As he helped her work through the math problems, Vince thought about choices. Every decision he'd made since leaving the Angels had been for Annie. Moving to a new apartment, taking the construction job, building a legitimate life. It was all for her. The thought of Tony threatening that peace made his jaw clench. After Annie went, back to her room, Vince pulled out the letter again. Tony's words seemed to mock him from the page. His brother had always known how to get under his skin, how to make him doubt himself. But something was different now. The fear was still there, but it didn't paralyze him like it used to. He thought about Clara's unwavering support, about the construction crew that had welcomed him without judgment, about Annie's trust in him. He'd built something real, something worth protecting. In the kitchen, Vince struck a match. He held the letter over the sink, watching as the flame caught the corner of the paper. The fire crawled slowly upward, consuming Tony's threats word by word. Vince didn't let go until the last piece burned away to ash. The past might never truly die, but it didn't have to control his future. Annie's homework lay scattered on the coffee table, a reminder of the simple, honest life they were building. That was what mattered now. That was worth fighting for. The county fair buzzed with life on a warm Saturday afternoon. Bright balloons bobbed in the gentle breeze, and the air was thick with the scent of cotton candy and grilled corn. Vince Malone stood beside a game booth, watching his daughter Annie aim a water pistol at a rotating target. His weathered leather jacket was gone, replaced by a clean blue work shirt with Mike's Construction embroidered on the pocket. "Almost got it, sweetheart," he encouraged, his deep voice soft and gentle. The teddy bear she wanted sat on the top shelf, just waiting to be won. Annie's tongue poked out slightly as she concentrated, her dark hair pulled back in neat pigtails. The stream of water hit its mark, and bells rang as the target spun rapidly. Her face lit up with joy as the booth operator handed her the prize. "Did you see that, Daddy?" she beamed, hugging the oversized bear. "I did it." "Sure did, Princess." Vince's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. The tattoos on his arms were barely visible now under his sleeves, like fragments of a past life fading away. He reached down and ruffled Annie's hair, earning a playful giggle. They walked through the fairgrounds together, stopping at various attractions. Annie insisted on riding the carousel 3 times, waving to her father from atop a painted horse each time she passed. Vince waved back, his heart full as he watched her laugh and smile without a trace of fear or worry. At the face-painting station, Annie chose a butterfly design. The artist, a kind, elderly woman, worked carefully to create delicate wings across Annie's cheeks. Vince sat nearby on a wooden bench, remembering how just months ago his daughter's face had been marked by bruises instead of butterflies. "Look, Daddy," Annie spun around, showing off her new decoration. "Now I can fly." "You sure can, baby," he chuckled, pulling out his phone to take a picture. Clara would want to see this. She'd become such an important part of their lives, stopping by regularly to check on Annie's recovery and share dinner with them. They found a spot near the food trucks to enjoy their fair treats: a corn dog for Annie and a pulled pork sandwich for Vince. Families milled around them, and nobody gave the former biker a second glance. He was just another dad spending time with his kid, and that feeling of normalcy was better than any rush his old life had offered. "Can we get ice cream?" Annie asked, pointing to a nearby vendor's colorful display. "After you finish your corn dog," Vince replied, wiping a spot of mustard from her chin with a napkin. These simple moments of parenting, of setting small boundaries and showing care, felt like victory medals to him. The afternoon sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the fairground. Annie's new teddy bear rode comfortably in Vince's strong arms as they made their way toward the exit. Her small hand fit perfectly in his, trusting and secure. "Had fun today?" he asked, though her bright eyes and constant smile had already answered that question. "The best day ever," Annie declared, swinging their joined hands back and forth. "Can we come back next year?" "You bet we can," Vince promised, squeezing her hand gently. They walked together through the parking lot, father and daughter, their shadows stretching out behind them while their path ahead lay bright and clear. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.